This is the Southwark Council offices on Tooley Street, central London. It's like all of the other 32 plus City of London local authority districts are responsible for council housing within their respective boundaries. The views from the council offices are pretty privileged, being near the South Bank, Tower Bridge, Hayes Galleria and City Hall, to name a few of the things you can see. However, 16 years ago, almost to the day of recording this script on the 3rd of July 2009, the view from the offices was much more concerning. Smoke was emitting from one of the council housing blocks just a few miles away. Today we're looking at the lessons that should have been learned in order to prevent the later Grenfell tragedy, which would largely eclipse the disaster in Southwark. Of course, today we're talking about the Lakanal House disaster. My name is John and welcome to Plainly Difficult. This video wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my YouTube, Patreon and Ko-fi members. If you want early access to the channel's videos, then you can from just £1 per month. And as always, the links will be in the pinned comment below. Background. So London post 1945 was pretty beaten up from the big old, near mid-century mutual destruction and mass trying to not alive everyone event. Post-war, many parts of the inner London area required rebuilding. Many had been left homeless, and in an effort to replenish housing stock and thus reduce the displaced, it was thought that high-rise blocks would be the magic bullet to offer some relief to the city's housing concerns. During this same period, other post-war new towns were built for people to leave the capital altogether, but that isn't a story for today. Instead, we're going to look at an inner London council estate, penned during the late 1950s. So this is Camberwell, South London, around here on a map, and it is the location of Scarrow Gardens estate. The site, pre-estate, was the home to a group of historic buildings, which in the 1950s was being used as council offices. Now, with the council having control of the site, it made it much easier to build a council estate. This was to be two 16-storey buildings with 7-inch reinforced concrete cross walls at intervals of 11 feet 6 inches with 4.5-inch thick floor and roof slabs. Both towers are roughly the same size at 41 feet wide and 187 feet long. The two towers were Lakanal Mary Carey. You see, every Plainly Difficult video has some kind of radiation link. In addition to the two towers, there are 4 6-storey blocks of maisonettes and 1 6-storey block of one-bedroom flats. The dwellings in Lakanal and Mary Carey are often considered maisonettes, as they cover 2 floors, but technically they don't have their own front door. Instead, access is via internal corridors. Because of this, in different reports, they have also been referred to as flats. So do forgive me, as I'll probably be using both terms interchangeably throughout the video. Regardless, being split-level maisonettes, they're constructed as pairs, which are up and over one another. For example, one would have its living room and kitchen over the other's bedroom. I hope this diagram I've made makes some kind of sense to the layout of the paired-up flats. To reach between each maisonette's internal floors, a hole is cut in the concrete floor slab. This was for a timber staircase. To help with internal fire suppression, they are protected using mineral fibreboard. However, the staircase does protrude slightly over into the communal corridors. The design afforded 4 points of escape in the event of a fire. This was via the main apartment entrance, out onto 2 balconies, one at each side of the block. This was from the kitchen living room area, and via a small dwarf door out from one of the bedrooms out into the internal passageway. This was rather complex, and residents weren't actually informed of the uses of these fire escapes. Access to each odd number floor, i.e. the entrance floor to each maisonette, was via a communal staircase and lift. The building was completed in 1960 under the ownership of the former Metropolitan Borough of Camberwell, and was handed over in 1964 and 1965 to the newly formed Southwark Council. So in the 1970s, the building would receive its first of many refurbishments. This included a new facade and security doors, because, well, these types of blocks became very quickly a hotbed of crime, where hiding places, covered walkways and open communal areas just invited the wrong type of people. Part of the refurbishment required the doors to have ventilation. This was done by wire vents in the centre of the door. It helped with ventilation, but would not be great for fire compartmentalisation. The facade was replaced with a timber frame with asbestos panel arrangement, because of course it would have asbestos. Later on in the 1980s, a false ceiling was installed in the communal hallways to enable services installation. This was due to the tower going from hot air heating to boiler house central heating. This was a plyboard with a melamine covering. It was fire resistant, but only to a point, and severely reduced the head height in the communal areas. During the 1980s refurbishment, some fire compartmentalisation was actually removed, and metal-framed windows, which were more efficient, but still not great, were added. Over the years, the communal areas would be repainted with oil-based coverings, which would eventually be covered with a fire-resistant coating. Originally scheduled for demolition in the late 1990s, the towers were once again given a new lease of life and a spruce up instead of being demolished. The towers in 2006 would receive a light refurbishment. This included changing the building's cladding to an aluminium and composite materials arrangement. Although it was Southwark Council's responsibility to make sure the building was up to the relevant fire codes, during the 2006 refurbishment it was deemed to not need a full review. But this would prove to be fatal. The disaster. It is the afternoon of the 3rd of July 2009, and everything seems normal in Lakanal House. At around 4:15 in the afternoon, a fire broke out in one of the bedrooms of flat 65. It would later be deemed it was a faulty TV set. Quickly, the combustible materials like bedding and furniture had caught alight. Residents in the masonette attempted to fight the fire, but quickly it was too much. A phone call to 999 was made at 21 minutes past 4. Around the same time, another call was made from flat 79 above, as smoke began to enter their apartment. Fire from the initial masonette had spread to the upper floor above via the window facade, assisted by a draft between the building and the cladding. Within 5 minutes, a significant portion of the building's exterior was ablaze. Just minutes after the first 999 call came in through, the first firefighters were on scene. There was a fire station just down the road at Peckham Road. The occupant of flat 79, seeing the smoke entering, asked the 999 operator whether they should stay or leave, but they were advised to stay put. By 4:23 p.m, 19 999 calls from Lakanal House had been received. By 4:42 p.m, another call had come in from flat 81 across from flat 79 on the 11th floor. At around the same time, flat 82 called in with their masonette filled with smoke as well. A fire had spread across floor 11. At 4:55 p.m, the operator at the 999 call centre noted the residents in flat 79 had gone silent. They had been on the phone to the 999 operator for nearly half an hour. Flat 53 on the 7th floor and flat 37 on the 5th floor were seen from the outside emitting smoke from the building's facade. Meanwhile, firefighters had been severely hindered in their efforts on the day of the fire. Emergency access lift was out of action due to refurbishment works. This forced the first responders to climb the emergency stairs. This was hindered even further by missing floor identification plates, requiring counting the floors as the firefighters went up. This severely reduced the amount of oxygen available for the firefighters to use on the burning floors. The building had in a shockingly quick time filled up with dark, thick smoke. The fire was blazing on multiple floors, blowing smoke into the sky. During the fire, some of the cladding had melted, dripping flaming molten material down onto the masonettes below, getting stuck in the anti-pigeon spikes. At 5:42 p.m, London Ambulance Service medics were sent up in a breathing apparatus, and along with firefighters discovered the first victims around half an hour later. Injured were evacuated to nearby hospitals of Guy's, Lewisham and King's for medical care. By the time the disaster was over, after several hours of firefighting and at least 18 appliances had been in attendance, 6 had lost their lives, including a baby just under a month old. The victims had all passed away within 90 minutes of the initial fire and were all residents of the 11th floor. The disaster had shocked the wider community and London as a whole. The smoke could be seen for miles. Even my wife saw them from her at the time place of work. The disaster was reported in national news. But of course, the main question on everyone's minds was, how did the fire spread so quickly? I mean, a fatal fire in one contained apartment is tragic enough, but how had it gone to multiple floors? Clearly there was an issue, and oh boy, it was a big one, that brought into question the hundreds of similar vintage and owned flat blocks that littered the London skyline. The investigation. So in the aftermath, the fire was initially treated as suspicious by the Met Police. However, this was only due to the cause not being immediately known in the first few days after the fire, as stated in a BBC report. Chief Superintendent Wayne Chance said the fire was being treated as suspicious because the cause was not yet known. But by the end of the month, a report released on the 30th of July named a report to the Secretary of State by the Fire Chief and Rescue Advisor on the emerging issues arising from the fatal fire at Lakanal House, Camberwell, on the 3rd of July 2009, would have already zeroed in on the original fire source. It has been established that the fire started in a bedroom of number 65 on the 9th floor and was caused by an electrical fault in a portable television. But the initiating cause of the fire is only just a small piece. True, if the fire hadn't set alight, there wouldn't have been any fire in the building at all that day. But the building shouldn't have just burnt up so quickly, spreading from dwelling to dwelling. Inspections of the building post-fire showed intense heat had travelled along both laterally and vertically, something that shouldn't have happened due to the theory of compartmentalisation. But clearly it didn't work on that day. Investigators discovered the poor compartmentalisation around the internal apartment staircases, as well as the flammable, when hot enough, false ceiling in the communal hallways. It was also found that the paint on the walls in the communal hallways had melted and caught on fire, even though it was rated for 60 minutes. However, it was found to have caught alight due to inconsistent application of its coating. It was also found that the compartmentalisation of the apartments was broken with improper sealing around the cuttings made for services installation, such as the hot water feed for the heating systems. The front doors, although proved to be fire resistant, as shown in this picture, were not smoke sealed, which allowed toxic and suffocating smoke to enter different dwellings via the communal corridors. The vents in the communal doors also helped to push the fire and smoke along the corridors, helping spread the fire quicker than intended. The spread of the fire externally from the quick ignition of the cladding was also quite clearly obvious just by looking at the aftermath photographs. Investigators also found that Southwark Council was responsible for fire safety checks at its flats from 2006. However, they had made no such checks at Lakanal, even after it had had its cladding changed. Now, on the cladding, it was found to have allowed the fire to spread so quickly. But the death toll could have been reduced if they weren't advised to stay put by the 999 call operators. This was the controversial stop and wait policy which the London Fire Brigade had in effect at the time, which was meant to work if the flats were properly compartmentalised, which would have allowed enough time for rescue teams to reach them. But we all know this wasn't sufficient at Lakanal House. Residents who had gone against this advice and had escaped whilst they still had a chance had survived. But on top of the advice, the tower block was confusing and had a complex layout, which led to confusion of both residents' ability to escape and for firefighting efforts to reach the stranded residents. A coroner's inquest was set up to investigate the cause of the 6 deaths. It ran for 10 weeks and was headed by Judge Francis Kirkham. The inquest would highlight all the previously mentioned issues with the building, which boiled down to just improper maintenance and management of the tower block. But the scary thing is to just look at the references section for this video. And a word that comes up quite a lot, as you'll see. That is Grenfell. You see, a lot of the resources I used for this video had actually been dug up in the June 2017 Grenfell fire inquiry, which, you guessed it, was down to very similar issues of combustible cladding and local authority ineffectiveness. But what was different from Grenfell is that Lakanal House is still in use today in 2025. It was quickly refurbished and reused for housing just a year after the fire. Southwark Council would plead guilty at the earliest opportunity in a 2017 hearing to 4 charges concerning breaches to health and safety regulations dating between 2006 and 2009. It was fined £400,000, reduced to £270,000 due to the guilty plea, plus £300,000 in costs. Reportedly, the council expressed sincere regret for the failures that were present in the building. Interestingly, many more properties under management of the council also fell short on inspections, apart from some select staff buildings. The sad thing is that the lessons from Lakanal were so glaring that they were not learned from, which meant that this disaster, being the worst in London history at the time, would quickly be overtaken by Grenfell, which should have very easily have been prevented. So that's my video on the Lakanal House fire. It's going to be a 3 on my scale, and this is what I've got for my root cause analysis card. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. This is a Plain Difficult production. All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Difficult videos are produced by me, John, in the currently very hot corner of southern London, UK. And all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and Mr. Music, can you play us out please?